What if I told you that your mind has the power to reach across distances, across time, to uncover hidden truths? Sounds crazy, right? Well, it's not. Today we're going to explore remote viewing and the reality of psychic phenomena, a topic that's been rigorously studied by scientists, secretly funded by governments, and debated by skeptics and believers alike. Let me start with a quick question. Have you ever had a moment where you just knew something before it happened? A gut feeling that turned out to be right, or maybe a vivid dream that later matched reality? What if those moments weren't random? What if they were evidence of something bigger, something that could change the way we think about reality, the mind, and even science itself? Remote viewing is a fascinating ability where individuals claim to see or sense locations, objects, or events that are far away or hidden. It's not magic, it's a process. But what's wild is that even though it sounds like fiction, decades of research say otherwise. And here's the kicker: some of this research wasn't just done by curious scientists. It was funded by the US government. Yeah, the government. We're talking about real, classified programs like Project Stargate, where trained individuals used remote viewing techniques to locate enemy bases, missing people, and even predict the future.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
But let's get real. Why would the US military pour millions of dollars into something that sounds like a sci-fi movie if it didn't work? That's the question we're here to unpack. Now, before we dive into the science, let's talk about what remote viewing actually is. Imagine this: someone gives you a random number or a set of coordinates, and based on nothing else, you're asked to describe what's at that location. No clues, no hints, just your mind. It sounds impossible, right? But over and over again, trained remote viewers have successfully sketched out objects, buildings, and even events that they couldn't possibly have known about. Let me explain how it works. Remote viewing is based on the idea that the mind is not limited by the physical senses. It's like your thoughts can reach out and gather information from the world around you, even if that information is hidden or far away. And get this, it doesn't even matter when the information exists. Remote viewers have described events that haven't even happened yet. Yeah, we're talking about precognition, seeing the future. Here's a quick example to blow your mind. One day, a trained remote viewer was tasked with describing a target object. The object was locked in a box, totally concealed. The viewer drew a wishbone shape, a spiral, and something shiny and straight. What was in the box? A potato masher, a wishbone-shaped handle, a spiral masher, and a shiny straight stem. Coincidence? Maybe. But these kinds of results happen way too often to ignore. This brings us to the science. Remote viewing isn't just wishful thinking or people making random guesses. Researchers like Dr. Garrett Model, a physicist at the University of Colorado, have studied these phenomena under controlled conditions. And here's what's crazy: the data shows that remote viewing works better than chance. Statistically significant results. That means the odds of some of these successes being random are less than 1 in a million. But how is this possible? That's where things get interesting. Some scientists believe that remote viewing could be linked to quantum mechanics, the branch of physics that studies the strange, unpredictable behavior of particles at the smallest scales. Quantum entanglement, for example, shows that particles can influence each other instantly, no matter how far apart they are. Could our minds somehow tap into this interconnectedness? Of course, not everyone agrees. There are skeptics who argue that remote viewing is just a mix of lucky guesses subconscious pattern recognition, and maybe even a little cheating. But here's the thing: in controlled experiments, cheating is ruled out. Double-blind protocols are used, meaning that even the researchers don't know the answers until after the experiment is complete. And yet the results still show something happening, something we don't fully understand. Here's where I want to challenge you. If remote viewing is real, what does that mean for how you see the world? Could your thoughts, your intentions, and your consciousness be more powerful than you've been led to believe? And if so, how could you use that power in your own life? Stick with me, because in the next part, we're going to break down the techniques behind remote viewing and why even beginners can sometimes get mind-blowing results. If you think this is fascinating so far, trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. Let's get into the how. How does remote viewing work, and can you do it? Yes, you heard me right. This isn't just something for scientists or trained psychics. With the right techniques, almost anyone can try remote viewing. And the results, they might just blow your mind. So here's how a typical remote viewing session works. First, there's a tasker. This is the person who selects a target, an object, a place, or even an event. The target is given a random identifier, like a number or a code. This is important because the viewer shouldn't have any information about the target beforehand. Then, the viewer sits down in a quiet space, clears their mind, and starts to draw or describe whatever comes to them. Here's the key: remote viewing isn't about trying to guess or analyze the target. In fact, analysis often gets in the way. The best remote viewers talk about quieting the mind and letting impressions come through. These impressions might be shapes, colors, textures, or even emotions. Over time, these fragments start to form a picture. For example, one of the original Stargate remote viewers described a target as round, metallic, and spinning. The target? A windmill. Another viewer once sketched out a detailed bridge with water underneath it. The target? The Golden Gate Bridge. The accuracy of these descriptions is what makes remote viewing so fascinating and so controversial. Here's where you come in. If you want to try remote viewing for yourself, start simple. Have a friend place an object in a sealed box while you're in another room. Sit down with a blank piece of paper, relax, and describe whatever comes to mind. Don't overthink it, just write or draw. Then compare your impressions to the object. You might surprise yourself. Now, let's talk about why the government was so interested in this. During the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union were locked in an arms race, not just for weapons, but for information. When rumors surfaced that the Soviets were experimenting with psychic spies, the US launched its own program, Stargate. Over the years, Stargate remote viewers were reportedly used to locate enemy submarines, find hostages, and even gather intelligence on secret military bases. Some of their successes remain classified to this day. But here's the wild part. Even though the Stargate program ended in the 1990s, the techniques developed during that time are still being used by private organizations and individuals around the world. And the results? They're just as compelling as they were decades ago. Let me ask you this: if remote viewing worked for the government, what could it do for you? Could you use it to find lost items, solve problems, or maybe even gain insight into your future? Stay with me, because in the final part, we're going to explore the deeper implications of remote viewing. What do these phenomena tell us about consciousness, reality, and the limits of human potential? And what can you do to tap into this hidden power? All right, we've talked about what remote viewing is and how it works. But now, let's zoom out and ask the big questions. What does remote viewing reveal about the nature of consciousness? Is reality more interconnected than we've been led to believe? And most importantly, what does this mean for you? Here's the thing: if remote viewing is real, and there's a mountain of evidence suggesting that it is, then our understanding of the mind is way too limited. Think about it. If your thoughts can reach across space and time, what does that say about the boundaries of the human mind? Maybe those boundaries don't exist. Scientists like Dr. Garrett Model have suggested that remote viewing might work because consciousness isn't stuck inside your brain. Instead, it could be something more like a field that connects everything in existence. This idea isn't new. Ancient spiritual traditions have talked about the interconnectedness of all things for thousands of years. But now, science is starting to catch up. And here's a mind-blowing thought: if consciousness is a field, then you're not just a passive observer of the world. You're an active participant. Your thoughts, your intentions, and your focus could be shaping reality in ways we're only beginning to understand. So, what can you do with this knowledge? First, take your mind seriously. If remote viewing shows us anything, it's that your thoughts have power. Use them wisely. Second, stay curious. Try experiments. Push the limits of what you think is possible. Who knows what you might discover? Now, let me end with a question: if your mind is capable of so much more than you've been told, what's stopping you from using it? The implications of remote viewing and psychic phenomena are so vast that they can make you rethink everything you've ever believed about reality, science, and even yourself. But let's not stop at the what and the how. Let's dive deeper into the why. Why is this possible? Why does it seem like some people can tap into this ability more easily than others? And why is this knowledge still on the fringes of mainstream science and society? These are the questions that can take this conversation to a whole new level. Let's start with the biggest elephant in the room. Why isn't this more widely accepted? If remote viewing has been studied for decades, funded by governments, and demonstrated in controlled experiments, why don't more people know about it? Why isn't it being taught in schools or universities alongside other scientific disciplines? The truth is, the world of science is slow to change. Paradigm shifts those moments when an entire field of knowledge is forced to evolve often take decades, even centuries. Think about it: when Galileo first said that the Earth revolved around the sun, he wasn't celebrated. He was condemned. When quantum physics started challenging the classical laws of Newtonian mechanics, many scientists resisted it for years. Remote viewing sits in that same space. It challenges our traditional understanding of the mind and reality, and that makes people uncomfortable. It's easier to dismiss it as pseudoscience than to grapple with the possibility that everything we know might be incomplete. But here's the good news: change is happening. More and more researchers, like Dr. Model, are willing to explore these edges of science openly and rigorously. Universities like the University of Colorado are allowing courses on psychic phenomena, and students are conducting experiments that replicate the results found in the literature. The evidence is piling up, and sooner or later, the world will have to take notice. Now, let's talk about you. If remote viewing really works, then what does that mean for your life? Could you use it to make better decisions, solve problems, or even understand yourself on a deeper level? Absolutely. But here's the catch: just like any skill, remote viewing takes practice. It's not a magic trick. It's like learning to play an instrument or mastering a sport. Some people might have a natural talent for it, but anyone can improve with time and effort. If you're serious about trying it, here's a simple exercise you can do at home. Find a friend to act as your task or have them pick a random object from their house, put it in an envelope or box, and set it aside. You don't need to be in the same room as them. Physical proximity doesn't matter. Then, sit down in a quiet space with a blank sheet of paper. Here's the key: don't try to guess. Don't analyze or think too hard. Instead, focus on impressions. Does a shape come to mind? A texture? A color? Maybe even a feeling or sound? Write down or sketch whatever comes to you. When you're done, compare your impressions to the object. Even if it feels like you totally missed the mark, keep practicing. The more you do it, the more you'll start to notice patterns and sharpen your ability. And here's a question for you: what would it mean if you succeeded? Let's say you accurately described an object you couldn't possibly have known about. How would that change the way you see yourself and your potential? Would you start to trust your intuition more? Would you begin to question the limits you've placed on your own abilities? This is where things get really exciting. Remote viewing isn't just a skill. It's a window into a bigger truth about the universe and your place in it. It suggests that we're all connected not just to each other, but to everything. And that connection runs deeper than we can currently explain. This brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of remote viewing: precognition. The idea that you can see events before they happen. For many people, this is the hardest concept to wrap their heads around. After all, how can you know the future if it hasn't happened yet? Doesn't that break the laws of physics? Well, maybe not. Some researchers believe that time isn't as linear as we think it is. Instead of moving like an arrow from the past to the future, time might be more like a web, with the past, present, and future all existing simultaneously. If that's true, then precognition could simply be a matter of accessing information that already exists, just in a part of the web we haven't reached yet. Think about how profound that is. If precognition is real, then the future isn't set in stone. It's more like a series of probabilities, and your choices in the present can influence which probability becomes reality. In other words, you have more power over your future than you think. Here's an example to make this real. In one experiment, students in Dr. Mottle's class used a technique called associative remote viewing to predict whether the stock market would go up or down the next day. Over 7 days, their predictions were correct every single time. One student even used this information to make real investments, turning $5,000 into $35,000 in just a week. That's a 600% return. Coincidence? Maybe. But the odds of guessing correctly 7 times in a row are less than 1 in 100. Now, I'm not saying you should start betting your life savings on remote viewing. But what if you could use this ability to make smaller, more meaningful decisions in your life? What if you could get clarity on a big choice or avoid a bad situation before it happens? Here's the bottom line: remote viewing and psychic phenomena aren't just about proving what's possible. They're about empowering you to see the world and yourself in a new way. They're about breaking free from the idea that you're just a passive observer in life. You're not. You're an active participant in a much bigger, more connected reality. So, where do we go from here? That's up to you. You could write this off as just an interesting idea and go back to life as usual. Or you could take this as a challenge to question what you think you know, a challenge to explore your own potential, a challenge to see just how far your mind can go. I'll leave you with one final thought. Imagine a world where everyone understood the power of their own consciousness. A world where we stopped seeing ourselves as isolated individuals and started seeing ourselves as part of a vast, interconnected web of reality. What could we achieve? How would we treat each other? How would we treat the planet? The truth is, we're only scratching the surface of what's possible. And whether you believe in remote viewing or not, one thing is clear: the mind is more powerful than we've ever imagined. So what are you going to do with yours?